This video contains spoilers for Chapter 4 of Doctor Who Flux. Village of the Angels sees the Doctor facing these foes for the first time since 2012, just over 9 years ago. Set in 1967, this episode finds a village and our main characters dealing with both new and familiar problems brought forth by the Weeping Angels. I was a big fan of The Haunting of Villa Diodati last year, which was also written by Maxine Alderton, who co-wrote this episode. So naturally, I was quite excited to see how she and Chibnall were going to tackle the Weeping Angels. And I must say, I was rather pleased with this chapter of Flux, and found there was a lot to like about it, particularly the way the Weeping Angels were portrayed. We've seen them 3 times before in full stories, and each time they have been written by Stephen Moffat, so naturally you don't fully know what you're going to get with them when somebody else tries their hand at it. But because Chibnall has done a good job with some other returning monsters, and Maxine Alderton has proven her talent, I was very hopeful about this one. And with each of the prior Weeping Angel stories, Moffat tried to do something a little bit different and add something to the mythos of the Weeping Angels. While there were just a couple of things he did which didn't fully work for me, generally he was good at bringing them back and doing something fresh with them. It's not just Blink 2 Electric Boogaloo, it's a new look at the Weeping Angels in a way that is hopefully frightening and intriguing. What I'm getting at is that I largely really enjoyed the direction the Weeping Angels were taken within here. We see some things that have been done before, but in a little bit of a different way. For example, they're able to use their powers to affect technology, as was seen in Blink, and here they have the device create an image of an angel. It's 2 things we've seen before combined in a way that makes sense. And the simplicity of them really works even for the stuff we've seen before. A man walks up to an angel in a graveyard, and as soon as he blinks, the angel is left standing alone. We've seen this stuff before, but it's so simple and effective that it works. In terms of the new ground that is covered, they do have some rather interesting stuff within here. The glimpses of Claire are really good, seeing stuff fall out of her eye, or the more obvious moment of her arms appearing as stone. The Weeping Angels haven't been presented quite in that way before, and it's a unique element of them which works pretty well. I also like the visual of her staring at herself with angel wings behind her. It's relatively simple stuff, and to me manages to balance that fine line of not being too silly. It's not super scary as an element to add, but it was pretty cool and definitely felt as though it fit within my understanding of the Weeping Angels. The atmosphere within this story was pretty good as well. It's not quite as excellent as what was done in The Haunting of Villa Diodati, but it did work pretty well for this one. Obviously, the setting of a graveyard at night is going to fit right in with the Weeping Angels, but also the time period and the house was just a great location to have the Doctor stuck within. They did a good job of nailing the right tone for this one, and while there were just a couple of elements that took away from that, they were largely able to stick to it to very effective ends. The Doctor is pretty solid in here. I rather enjoy her within this one. In terms of just being that presence that this character needs to be, Jodie Whittaker does a really good job in the part. There's some dramatic moments she really sells, but also just these interactions between characters which are so important. The jokes are a tad hit and miss. There was actually one that worked for me, followed immediately by one that didn't.
How did you get in here?
Your door was open.
It most certainly was not.
Well, it was once I opened it, but let's not get bogged down in the order of things. Not when we can get on to whatever experiments you're doing down here, Mr.
Professor Jericho. Eustachius Jericho.
Eustachius?
Yes.
Oh, wish I had that in Scrabble. 33 on a triple word score. I won't be allowed it. Proper noun. Not unless you play George Eliot's rules. She allows them.
So yeah, I'm still really enjoying her character, and it's a shame that she's only got another 5 episodes left. And can we just pause for a second to say, wow, we're 4 episodes in and this thing is almost over. I can't believe there's only 2 more episodes of Flux left. It's crazy how fast this thing has gone, and also the whole era. But I look forward to seeing what answers and questions we get by the end of this thing, and yeah, it's crazy how fast this thing has gone. And speaking of Flux as a whole, I also think the integration of the ongoing storyline was decently handled. There's 2 sides to this, one in which it was done very well, and one which was a little odd. As an example of the first, the reveal that the Angels were working for Division was really good, and helped to add something to the larger storyline that fit naturally within the narrative of this episode. That is textbook exactly how this kind of thing should be handled. It felt naturally included within the larger piece, but also was quite an interesting revelation. And the idea of a rogue angel hiding away in Claire's mind is really neat, not just because there's some cool ways in which the episode visually represents that, but because it's something new and intriguing with the angels. I always have concerns about getting too much information about the Weeping Angels, as I think they work best with a certain level of mysticism to them, and I think this does contribute to that to an extent, but it's also pretty cool and I enjoyed watching it. So within the context of just this episode, I can't really complain. And all of this naturally led into the end of the episode, in which the Rogue Angels struck a better deal to give the Doctor to Division. It was such a natural progression of the story that not only was it very interesting, but I was never taken out of it. I also like 13's sort of carbonite moment at the end of the episode. The first time I watched it, I hadn't quite made up my mind, but now I am pro Weeping Angel 13. It's quite a fun and pretty cool visual that's just got a sprinkle of silliness to it without being utterly ridiculous. On the whole, I think they managed to do a pretty good job with this balancing act. And the moment actually means something because she's being sent away to Division, which means we know something is going to go down in the next 2 episodes. It's all very exciting and well presented. So that was an example of the episode doing a good job of mixing the Flux storyline in with the Weeping Angel episode. The 3 scenes with Belle, on the other hand, the opposite is true. The scenes themselves aren't bad exactly, but they don't actually fit within the rest of what is being shown here. It's so separate and so unrelated to the rest of the storyline that whenever the episode cut away from the village, it just never worked. These 2 things don't mesh well together, and they weren't able to find a way to naturally integrate that stuff within here because it is so unrelated. In fact, it's so disconnected from the rest of the entire episode that the third of those 3 scenes was put in the middle of the credits, which I don't think has ever been done before in Doctor Who. And I get why, because where else would it go? It just doesn't fit with the rest of the episode. And if you'd put it earlier, you would have broken up the tension for a 3rd time. It does a little bit take away from that memorable visual the episode ended on, but only a little. I think the ending still stands on its own as a solid cliffhanger. I do wish this plot stuff had not been included in here, but I'm sure it'll be important for later in the show. It just holds this episode back a tad. Everything would have worked a lot better without those scenes breaking up the tension of the Weeping Angels storyline. And in terms of the content of the actual scenes, it was fairly engaging, about as engaging as it was last time, but because the surrounding episode of Village of the Angels was notably better than that of Once Upon Time, it stood out a lot more when we cut away to Belle and that plot. My one complaint, though, is the way the 3rd scene ended. She knows that she has one chance to send the message, and she saves the most vital piece of information for the very end.
Oh, coordinates. So I'm heading to you. Oh, no, don't run away!
No.
It's so silly, and the way it's delivered doesn't work either. I certainly don't blame the actor for this. I understand a clunky piece of dialogue is almost impossible to deliver, and I know I wouldn't have done any better than her. That line definitely falls on one or both of the writers of this episode, but man, it doesn't work. And in terms of our 2 companions within here, they work well enough. They don't get the most to do, but I enjoy their somewhat limited presence within here. Dan is still an enjoyable character, Yaz is still a likable lead, and they work well alongside one another. They've got a couple of good scenes, but the focus really isn't on them, so I don't have too much to add. The stuff with Peggy was pretty good, while also being pretty predictable. I liked it well enough, and it worked as a motivation for this town to be out searching. The revelation was expected, yes, but I still enjoyed it. I mean, even if it had completely surprised me, it wouldn't have mattered all that much, because what is important is the idea that the Weeping Angels are cruel and like to leave somebody behind, and I do like that idea. The characters of Claire and Jericho worked rather well for me. They're 2 of the more effective supporting one-off characters of the Jodie Whittaker era. They're not incredible by any means, but I enjoy the way they are presented within here. Claire has more of a struggle to deal with and thus gets a tiny bit overshadowed by that Weeping Angel, but she's still pretty good. I just don't have that clear of a picture of who she is because it was mostly about what's wrong with her, which was a Weeping Angel. And Jericho is a fun character, I'm not gonna lie. He's mostly nice, a little full of himself, and he works well within here. He's the kind of character that I feel like is hard to make work because they could easily come across as boring, but through the performance and the writing, they managed to make that character land. Although I liked a lot about what was done with the Weeping Angels, there's a couple of minor things that take me out of the episode a little. There seems to be a real inconsistency with how fast Weeping Angels can actually move. We've known for a long time that they are insanely fast when they are unobserved, yet there are moments here where a character will turn around very slowly and the angel will move almost as though it's a normal person. And there's also moments where an angel is visible but not entirely. So does that mean that the part of them that is not seen can move? How exactly does this work? If you can see the wings of an angel, surely it can't move, right? And yet there's this weeping angel that moves when its wings would clearly be visible to 3 people at least. So I don't understand exactly how that works. It's a little bit odd. And I don't think it fits within what we've seen before. Also, I really liked the setting of the Doctor and company surrounded by this tunnel with angels coming from every direction, and it was a largely good scene. Having said that, the moment where she says she's going to race the Weeping Angel is ridiculous to me in its execution. The Doctor knows better than everyone just how fast the Weeping Angels are, and yet she thinks she has even the tiniest chance of running away from them when it is that close behind her. Even if it was at the end of a long tunnel, it would be questionable. But this just doesn't make sense to me. Why would she even try that? She says she has to turn around to escape, and while it is likely that she would trip backwards if she tried walking backwards, it's certainly a safer bet than turning her back on a Weeping Angel. To me, that moment felt forced, like the writers wanted the Doctor to find out they were done chasing her, but the way it's executed does not make sense. Conceptually, there's things I like, but it doesn't land in execution. But there are still some things conceptually that need to be worked on before it was actually put in the episode. I still really like the way the Weeping Angels are portrayed in here, and even though it isn't as strong for me as the prior efforts with them, I am a fan of this episode in spite of a couple of things that didn't work for me. Overall, I had a really good time with this chapter and consider it to be the best one of Flux yet. Maxine Alderton and Chris Chibnall have done a very good job at creating this portrayal of the Weeping Angels, which has both new ideas as well as familiar ones. The atmosphere is pretty good, the setting fits really well, I like the Doctor in here, and the final image before the credits is certainly a memorable one to leave audiences with for the next week. To me, this is a very good episode, and I am going to give Village of the Angels a rating of 8.25 out of 10. And that does it for this review. Be sure to leave your thoughts on this one down below if you feel like doing so. I will be back soon with a review of Survivors of the Flux, as well as the rest of the series, a classic Doctor Who Season 13 serial ranking before long, and even more in the future. So I hope to see you around for some of that, and if not, that is absolutely fine, so long as you know that I appreciate your time here today. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, take care, and have a lovely week.